Greetings, brothers and sisters. I want to do a little introduction here. Um, I got to get to a lot of funny things today and just a lot of open tabs that I want to get through. But Don Lemons is going in on CNN and, blames everything but his suckiness. I haven't seen the video. I just read the headline, but he's always funny. Like he can't not suck or not play himself. But I want to start off with a story from my youth, my childhood. I was telling my wife this the other day. We were out for a walk. I might have shared this in my Journey series, but when I was a little kid, my mom went to work. She worked in like high schools. My dad was a guidance counselor. My mom was like a paraprofessional, and she worked, I don't know, doing something. She was more of a stay-at-home mom, but there was a period of time where she went to work. And like I was often would come home to an empty house, right? I was like 7, 8, 9 years old, those years. They hired like a high school girl to be there, and I guess she'd make me food sometimes, and I'd go out and play with my friends. I think I was, pretty brutal. I don't know. I don't remember being cooperative with all that, but there were times I would just come home and I'd be by myself. Like I was always doing something, right? Like I tried to build a raft with leftover, like an old shutter and piece of plywood and things, and I built this thing that probably never would have floated. I just nailed everything I had, every piece of wood that we had together. I didn't know how we were going to get it down to the pond or there's a river near us, but I was like, planning on going on an adventure. I dug a hole where I just started digging, and it was like 5 foot deep, 5 foot wide, 5 foot, whatever it was. Um, and I hit solid rock, and I had to soak the hole in water because I was a little kid. I didn't have enough weight to, these things. I think I was talking about this. I don't know, somewhere, maybe in Journey series. But the other thing that happened was I had a sister who was a hippie, and my brother was a Vietnam vet, and I don't say he's more of a right-leaning person because he has his, some liberal views, but he was definitely more, a Republican than my other members of my family. I don't know if I don't think he ever voted. He was sort of a truther, and he went to Vietnam. But my sister was more of a hippie. She marched in hippie things. She did hippie stuff. And she came home. She would come home every other weekend or whatever. And one time she brought a candle making kit. We made candles. And I thought it was like a cool thing. We melted wax. And she had like a mold. I think it was an owl. And some wicks. And we made this candle. And I was like, well, I could do that. So I started making candles on my own. And what I would do was I would take my crayons that apparently I wasn't using, and I'd melt them, and I would pour them into like an old prescription bottle, and I would take some string and put it in as a wick, which was, I guess a pretty good thing. I mean, not a pretty good thing, but I kind of figured it out. But I think I used a pot to melt the wax, and the pot was hard to clean. My mom was pissed at me, so I decided to use a Hungry Man. They had these tin foil or aluminum foil, like pot pie. It was like you would bake it inside this very thin. Sometimes you'll get lasagna from a restaurant or something, and it'll be in one of these metal, these very thin metal, aluminum, disposable pans, and you can reheat them, or a frozen pot pie or something or frozen pie or something. You know what I'm talking about. It was very thin. And I think my mom cleaned them and saved them for, But anyways, I got this thing. And we had a gas stove. And I put the crayons in it, and the gas stove melted a hole in in this very thin, pan or whatever, not pan, but, whatever baking thing. And started a fire. The wax got on the stove and it melted. There was this big fire, right? And I threw water on it, and it made it worse. Like it just blew up. Like when I threw the water, it just spattered and went everywhere. And I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I stopped for a second. I said, "All right, turn off the gas." So I turned off the gas, and then I threw water on it and put the wax out. And I looked at it. I was like, "Holy boop!" Right? Boop. And there was wax all over. And we had this old-fashioned wallpaper. So this house was an old house. This is 1970s. So this is wallpaper from the 50s or 60s. Probably came with the house. Definitely came with the house. And it wasn't nice. It was old-fashioned for my time. And there was wax everywhere. Like it blew up, and it was all over the walls, and it was like multicolored wax because I put different colored crayons in there. And it was all over the stove. And, I was like making a business decision. Like, I did things like this, and my parents never knew. Like, there were times that I did things, and I just would clean it up after myself, and like as far as they knew, nothing ever happened, right? But I'm looking at this, and I'm gauging my abilities. This is me getting on top of the stove and scrubbing the walls and not doing damage to the wallpaper, and all the glow, the wax that's now hardening all over the stove and everywhere. And I was like, "There's no way I can clean this up. There's absolutely no way I can make this look like nothing happened." There's no way they're not going to know. And so I could spend 2 hours, trying to clean this thing up and get in trouble, or I could just go do what I wanted and get in trouble, and it's not going to be as bad as trying to clean this thing up, right? There's just, I don't have the capabilities, right? And probably that might have been the reason that they hired that girl. Now that I think about it. But, there's some, like, ties to what's going on in the world, right? Like some things that are just impossible to fix. Sometimes you make a mistake and it's beyond your ability to fix it, right? It's beyond your ability to clean up after yourself the mess that you've made. And, that's happened in the world, right? Like that's a metaphor for what's going on now. Like it's just such a, an intricate mess of problems, financial, social, moral, on all levels. There's no way to make this right. There's no way to bring this back to some, higher level or, just even moderate level of existence where there's, fairness and equitability and responsibility and good moral character and, all the things that we've lost. And it's been lost for years. It's not like it just happened. There's been a slow decline of human morality and human, competence over centuries. And, we're just seeing it like it's been throughout my whole life and your whole life and everybody's whole life. It isn't, it's been a slow decline. And now we're past the point of no return. Like this is what I talk about all the time. Like you can't clean up this mess. The only thing you can do is, reboot a new system when this one collapses, right? You have to take your punishment, your consequences, like, whatever consequences I got for doing what I did, whatever it was. You have to just accept them and, move on because it's not something that you can, hide anymore or, you can fudge anymore or whatever. And that's where we've reached that point. We've passed that point a long time ago. And so there's another thing I want to address here. I'm not getting very many comments from Trumpers. I don't know if Trumpers are just, they're not viewing him as a hero and a savior anymore. I guess some people are, but not here. Either they just don't want to comment, or like same thing happened with the Cubies, or they've left my channel, whatever it might be. I don't know. But I got an interesting comment because I said there is Trump's derangement syndrome from the Trumpers because people who are believing after all the evidence and experience that Trump is going to, save the world. And I got this great comment from somebody that says, "Paul, reverse TDS is a real thing. I lost a friend I knew for 20 years just voicing my opinions on warp, boops, etc. Operation Warp Speed. I voted for him too, but after CV happened and there are good people flipping, I really saw things differently, and that's when everything went snarky and sideways. As Tony Soprano would say, "Hey, we're gonna do, we what are you gonna do? Hey, what do you gotta do? I guess is his saying. I didn't see The Sopranos. LOL. Um, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that because I'm talking about Trump, and it just should go away. Like he's failed, and I don't think anybody really wants to see a Trump and Biden. I mean, maybe it'll be entertaining. I don't know, a little bit. We'll see how it plays out. But right now, I just a Trump Biden runoff just seems not only redundant but just like hard to bear. Trump has become a complete joke, and he's going in hard, and he's embracing the QBs and some of the truther narratives, and saying he's going after the deep state. But he's only saying that to save his own skin, and it's always about him. He say he's doing it for you, and I got a Chris Christie thing of him going in on Trump. Trump's always saying, I'm doing this for you, but everything Trump does is for himself. And to the Trumpers, if you are still listening, the way that you see Biden, like people who think Biden's a savior or Biden's a good leader, and you're like, oh my God, how do you possibly rearrange reality? Like, what's wrong with you psychologically that you can't see what Joe Biden actually is? And to you Trumpers, that's how we see you now. Like you ones who still think Trump is a savior, like he clearly isn't that. Like when a president gets elected, I mean, this even happened with Obama. Like Obama didn't vote for the Iraqi wars, and he wasn't a part of the big event in 2001. And so there was a chance like he was different because he hadn't voted on it yet. There was no record. He was a new congressman, whatever. You never knew what someone's going to do. Like whatever they say to get elected, that's what they say. Like that's, they all lie. And they all, no one could tell you the truth. No one could be a truther and get elected. Like they'd have to play the game. I got something with Ice Cube too. Someone sent me. He talks about basically being a truther, and so I just throwing that out there. But you don't know what people are. Even if they say they're a truther, whether they are or not. Like if they're really into it, or they're just like Trump was trying to win an audience. But when a person's president and they take actions, you could or whatever. Like the presidency doesn't have the power that we think it does, or most people think it. The president has, but still they could affect the world in a different way. They could be playing wolf, a wolf in sheep's clothing, a truther in sheeple clothing, right? And so, JFK Jr. Sure, we don't know what he would do. Like maybe is it worth giving him a shot? Well, I'm not going to vote, but if you are, yeah, maybe. At least he says he's on the right side of things. But once the person has a presidency, which Trump did, we know what he is. We now know what Trump is, and he's a scumbag. And the one thing I liked about Trump was he lied, but he didn't hide his scumbaggery. He didn't hide that it was all about him. He didn't hide his selfishness. And for me, he was a liar and he lied about it. But you could see through the lies, and he wasn't trying to hide it. Like even tweeting in the middle of the night, he wasn't trying to act presidential. He wasn't trying to play a role. But now, he's embracing a role that we know he won't. Embracing positions like a savior that he clearly isn't. Like that's what sucks about him now. Like he's pretending to be something he never was. He was never in it for you. His selfishness has always been there. He's a self-centered, narcissistic person. And, like I said before, he wasn't trying to hide it, but now he's pretending to be, your savior, right? He's going to save you and the system, and he's doing it all for you. He's fighting the battle for you. And if you believe that at this point, like it's just embarrassing. Like it's just, we could all see it, and yeah, everyone can see it, but Trumpers, everybody but Trumpers can see it. There's no doubt about it. We know he's a known entity now, as a president and as a leader and as a person. There's no, redefining him or reinventing him, only for people who are oblivious to reality. I mean, that's how bad it's gotten. What I had said before, we're in a time of truth where if you just tell the truth, even if it's unflattering to yourself, or you're not trying to spin things. It's such a breath of fresh air, and it's necessary. Like right now, it's just time to be honest with yourself, and then to other people, but mostly with yourself, because it's a moment of truth, right? We've reached a collective moment of truth before the system collapses, and we got to be honest about ourselves and the system and all these things. Honest with ourselves, and that's just what's necessary for this time. The other thing is, I just want to talk briefly about my health. I was thinking about this. I'm taking this stuff now called berberine. Dr. Berg posted a video on it, and there are several other videos. And my wife had bought some a long time ago from Arcola, which was good. But it's something that helps with glucose. And, I've had issues, post-COVID issues. I'm doing a lot of work, and I feel great, but there's sometimes my body glitches out. And, I was taking this, I was drinking a smoothie every morning with blueberries, and I started off with lemon and limes, and then I started using oranges, but I take a lot of vitamin C and also kale. And it was a good way to start my day, but somebody sent me this, like a thing for fatty livers, which was a half a teaspoon of olive oil and a half a teaspoon of lemon juice and a little bit of cayenne. And my wife and I have been taking that, and it just, I feel like my liver and my gallbladder, and I've been doing other things. There's some videos that came up. The thing that's good about Dr. Berg, and, I don't compare him to an Alex Jones, in the way that Alex Jones is a shill, but he's, kind of the Alex Jones of this alternative supplement-based keto diet, which I'm not on. It's like he might, he's a Scientologist, and his son has, ratted him out on YouTube, and like there's things about him, but he is, a legitimate healer. But if you watch his videos, there are other videos of people like him, and I've been getting those videos in my YouTube feed, and I've been benefiting from them. And this stuff with berberine, I don't have heart disease in my family. We don't have like a heart, no one dies of a heart attack in my family. And there's longevity in there. My grandparents lived, I've talked about this before. My parents and grandparents lived into their 90s, and one grandparent who died in his 80s was a fireman and fought in 2 world wars and died of lung cancer. And he smoked, but that was, that was based in his choices, his life choices, and not his longevity and his, his strength. He would have probably lived into his 90s or whatever. He was, aware of his health, and whatever. Took some care of his physical body and his choices, in terms of the way he treated his lungs, right? He was exposed to all the chemicals in World War I, and then as a fireman, back when they didn't wear masks, and then, he worked with toxic glues and things. He made fishing poles and things like this. But there is diabetes in my family. My grandmother was diabetic, and my dad, had probably flirted with diabetes and things like this. And so there's issues with glucose, with just berberine does is help balance that. And, there's a long list of benefits. And, I was, I've reached a part of my life where I have to take interest in my health ever since I've had COVID. Like I barely took supplements, and once in a while I would take an herbal tincture if I was getting sick. But I really wasn't focused on my health and giving my body what it didn't have, and, getting healthy again or whatever. And, as you get older, you just have to. At some point, you have to take an interest in it. And I know that I have to lose some weight. Like I have a little bit of a pot belly, which is just after a week of taking berberine. I usually would have to eat before going to sleep. Like I won't go to sleep if I don't eat something right before bed, which is sucky because, that's where I put on the weight. But ever since I've been taking this, and it's sort of balanced my glucose or whatever it does, it's made a big difference. I haven't eaten at night for a number of days, and now I'm doing this olive oil thing with the lemon. It was just like, and I'm doing other things to help reduce, a fatty liver and work on my gallbladder and liver, which are more an issue for me than my heart, but those things lead to heart issues and things like this, right? It's a it's a comprehensive thing. And I've, gotten better and better over the, past years that I'm working more outside, getting more sun, and, my physical stamina and things like this. And, it's been increasingly better. A lot of things have come from viewers. Like I did some various acupressure, and that helped, and that led me to find other things. And, I have various things I do now if there's an issue to get the energy moving, the meridian energy. But I just thought I would share that because it's there are things out there for people on the internet, and if you have an issue, I would tell somebody. Like I was telling my brother, I was taking pine pollen, which has been very helpful. It has a lot of B vitamins in it, something I've been taking for a while, and it's something you can gather yourself. Like I'm interested. My wife and I are interested in growing herbs. My wife has gotten into making tinctures now. We have a goldenrod tincture, which helps with the spike protein, but anyways, things that can be grown, and things that are local. And then I like the idea of tinctures. We've been talking about that, my wife and I, which is a way that you can just take it in liquid form. And I'm not recommending anything here. I'm not a medical person. This is not what I'm doing here. What I'm saying is there are things available that can help you, like they can help people. Not you specifically, but if people have a health issue, there's other ways than allopathic medicine, and there are methodologies out there. A lot of healers on YouTube. There's lots of people with knowledge and abilities. I've learned a couple of different stretches, one for Dr. Berg, another that a viewer sent me, that are great for the lower back, for the psoas muscle and things. And these things just get sent to me every once in a while. YouTube recommends one of these things. And some of them I watch, some of them I don't. But the ones I watch oftentimes have, it's meant for me to see. And once I started watching health videos, and I never watched them, this is this has just been since COVID, when my health took such a horrible toll. And I started to do research and look up things, and then the algorithms kicked in and the spying and stuff, and they started to recommend these things. And I watched a few, so they recommended more, these types of things. And so many different things have helped me. I was having these back spasms, and it seems to be the rhomboid muscle, and I found a video about that. These things just come up, right? And they've turned around my health, right? Where I was certainly in decline, and I would have had probably significant health issues if I didn't do something. Like I just, I would have these blood tests done after I had COVID for the first time, and I was heading towards diabetes. My thyroid was low. My testosterone was low. I had all these. My immune system was barely functioning, and if I didn't do something, I would I would just physically have collapsed. Right? I would have been sick all the time. I would have been incapable of doing farm work. I would have been, probably had difficulty cranking out these videos. I mean, I was entering into you have to do something now, or it's a point of no return, right? You have to, again, as you get older, these things have to be looked at. Things that I weren't willing to, do. Like I wasn't willing to put much time and effort into my health, but I had to. There was no choice, right? It was that, or just be sick all the time till I died, right? Just having poor health for the rest of my life. And what I'm saying is there are things out there, and you have to switch up your diet. You have to, you have to change things. Like you can do things when you're young, your body will help you, but then eventually things start to break down. Internal organs break down physically, and you have to, adjust what you're doing. You just have to. Everybody does. And you think about all those people in Walmart, and obese people, and people who are. I mean, there's people you see every day that are carrying around another person, like they weigh twice as much as what they should, and they're carrying around all that extra weight. And there's people who are suffering all kinds of physical issues, and they're just going to the allopathic medicine and getting meds that have side effects, or they're not changing their diet, they're not changing anything. It's willfully wanting to suffer, right? You're not. I mean, there's people out there who are the information's available. There's videos that are probably being recommended to them that would help them, or articles or things, or people are talking to them. I said to my brother, I'm really benefiting from this pine pollen. And he goes, well, I sneeze all the time. It's on my car, and because he was in the ashram in Georgia, and he didn't want to hear it. But I was like, we have the same physical kind of makeup, and things that would benefit me would benefit him, right? Especially as he got older, and like, I could see there was decline in his thinking abilities, and he would tell the same stories over and over again, or whatever. But he was unwilling to even think about it, right? But I have all these things that are helping me now, and I know they probably would help him because, we have the same genetic makeup. But he's unwilling. He was unwilling to like even think about it because he's just doing his own thing, which is fine. That's his choice. But that's how people are. There's information out there, and people just don't want it. They push it away. They reject it. It could be made easy for them, right? And I've been taking a number of supplements, which I've talked about. And, eventually I got to make this audio book and talk about all the different things. And, I don't like doing it. But again, once it's in a routine, it's a habit. And some of them have a more profound, my body responds to them in a way that I'm like, wow, like I feel a boost from that, right? Like some of them I take, I don't know if it's how anything's, and it's a hard thing because you're deficient in something, and then once you get enough of it, you don't want too much of it. You don't want excess. And there's muscle testing, and there's things that you can do, but I haven't embraced that. So it's like one of these things trying to be intuitive. I mean, it sucks not having a quality healer to talk to. They have these different machines now that can see what you need and the doses you need and things. So that's a little bit rough. Like I'm out there and on my own. I mean, my wife knows things and whatever, and I could do research about it. But like there's a balance to it. But I was definitely depleted of all these things because of the toxic nature of our foods and our system and all these issues that are out there, and needed stuff. And it's there. It was available and readily available, like the supplement age and the herbal age and the various alternative health modalities out there. It's a rare opportunity, and all the videos and things out there are very informative. The information's there. And, again, I'm not recommending anybody do anything. But, if people are suffering and they're not looking into it, and, even finding a quality healer, finding somebody, alternative healer, when the system isn't working for them, right? And there's people who are suffering and they won't change their diet, they won't change anything. But they complain about it, right? They won't stop drinking or smoking or eating processed foods, high sugar diet, high, these various unsaturated, these fats that are horrible, right? All these horrible, oils and fats that are out there that are, there's a natural craving in the animal kingdom. There's a great video, I don't think it's available anymore, called the Great Porn Experiment by this guy Gary Wilson. It's a TED Talk. And he talks about the binge mechanism. When you're programmed to binge, we have a binge component, and it's mostly to do with, certainly, sexual, your sexual urges, but it's also to do with your, sugar and fat. Sugar and fat are very rare. Sugar's pure energy, and fat is, whatever it is. And it's, it doesn't come around in nature the way that we have it now. The level of fat and sugar that we have and we're able to produce is not naturally available. Like fruits, natural fruits are very sour, and they're not, they've been cultivated to be sweet and, juicy and things like this. A lot of our foods have had that. But in nature, things, animals are very gamey. If you go hunting, you have an animal that's a natural animal. It's going to be lower in fat. It's going to have tough meat. It's going to be hard to. I mean, it's not like the kind of livestock that are produced, and all the fats that are now so readily available, nut oils and things like that. It takes a lot of energy and machinery to produce the level of fat that we have, and most of it's crap. It's not good for us. It's concentrated when you get small doses of it if you ate certain nuts or things like this. And now they're able to press it and get lots of it and get cheap fat. And, sugar is sugar, right? So, but in nature, they're not available. So when you would find them, an animal finds them, they gobble it up. You have a binge mechanism. Oh, this is a rare thing to get. You should have it. You should get as much as you can because fat and sugar aren't, they're things that you need for energy, but we have an abundance of it, and it's poor quality, and it's destroyed the physical system and also created mental breakdown and cloudy thinking and all kinds of problems. And so that's all there. And so we all have to realize that and be aware of the poor diet and the quality of food that we're getting, the environment, the electromagnetic poisoning, and it's a time for when our bodies are being poisoned and attacked on all levels, and you have to do things. And if there's reactions to it, you have to change. You have to invest in it, and you have to change your routine. People have to. I mean, that's the other alternative is just be sickly until you die, have chronic illness. I mean, many of you have experienced this, even young people. You either change, or you're just gonna accept a mediocre life of just struggling physically and low energy and just it's kind of like giving up, right? And the majority of people just give up, and they don't want to better themselves, or I mean, this is just the idea of supplements and things is physical health, but this is also to do with spiritual health. And there's, like I talk about, the Gratefulness meditation that we're doing. There are things out there that can benefit you, that people can benefit from, and most people just don't do them. Like the Sajmarg meditation that I've done for years is a miraculous system, and the majority of people just reject it right off the bat. They want no part of it. They're not willing to try it or anything. It's not, it's not for everybody. Like lots of people try it and it doesn't take. And then there are people who try it and do it, and they receive phenomenal benefit, and they know it works, and they do it for a couple of years, and they just kind of give up. And they know it works, but they know it's a good thing, but they just quit. They just get bored with it, or they just whatever happens. I mean, and I've seen this over and over again. People will go do the low things. They'll go do drugs. They'll smoke crack. They'll take fentanyl. They'll watch crappy videos that make them feel bad. They'll watch hours. They'll become addicted to porn. They'll eat horrible foods. They'll do all these things. But when something good comes along, they might try it for a little bit and they feel better, and then they give it up. I mean, or they don't try it at all. Like, it's just human nature right now. Or human beings are predisposed to go and do the unhealthy things, the evil things, embrace the dark side, follow Trump, follow Biden, delude themselves, and, just become a bigger part of the problem and leave the world a much worse place. Anyways, let's go for some stories. Okay, so I got recommended a Fetterman tweet of John Fetterman, but this is his wife. And let's check on with her. She's got a Fetterman bobblehead. You know what? That is not an accurate. I mean, this is a case where the bobblehead looks better than the actual person. It's not drooling on himself. Here it is. That's not her. Same event I'll never forget years ago, arriving an event dressed in similar fashion. The security guard asked me, "Is that gentleman bothering you?" And I said, "Yes, but that he is also my husband." So here she is dressed up. He's got this weird barcode tattoo. And she's talking about how they'll go to events and people think that, he's not quality enough for her. And she doesn't have a problem of crapping all over him, right? And on her Twitter feed. He is bothering me, but he's also my husband. Kaboom. So that's, big part of his problem is right there. I don't know who that is, but she looks like some sort of demented. She looks like those hobbits she looks like Gollum before it became Gollum. Some more stuff going on here. I don't know. A couple dog pictures and whatever. And then there was this one. This is the one I want to show you. It says, when I became senator, I never thought I'd be sitting outside eating canned cheese. Thank you, Patty Murray. He's eating some Cougar Gold with some wheat thins. And he's got his phone there. He's got his thumbs up, this guy. He's got his, is that some kind of light beer? Is that Miller Lite or Bud Light? I don't know. Miller Lite, I think. That's what your experience, surprised that you're eating cheese, not that you're a senator and you can't speak, right? So I thought that was great. There's more stuff going on there, but let's go to our other things here. Okay, YouTube recommended this to me. This girl, Riley Gaines. I've had a number of videos recommended to me. About her. Didn't know what this was about, but I finally watched one this morning, and I thought I'd share it with you all.
Thank you for your courage in being here today. Thank you for your courage and advocacy for women. You have been subjected to an unbelievable amount of abuse.
Boom.
You talk about intimidation, threats of violence. You have suffered it. I want to put up here a picture so everybody can see it. This was the welcome you were treated to at San Francisco State University just a couple of months ago.
I don't like this guy right off the bat, but, whatever. This is interesting.
When a mob assembled where you were supposed to speak, I believe for over 3 hours, screamed, threatened you, barricaded you in a room. Do I have that basically correct?
Yes. I was held for ransom for 3.5 hours by hundreds of these protesters, as you see on the board. They demanded that I had to pay them money if I wanted to make it home to see my family safe again. The law enforcement in San Francisco, I respect. And I think law enforcement is what's brave, not me. And I respect all law enforcement. But the law enforcement I was met with in San Francisco, in my opinion, failed miserably. And
that's a shocker. Now, we've heard that San Francisco's just run amok. And it's supposedly one of these great cities. But it's just, even like liberals, and people are liberals are leaving. Like there's just a complete breakdown there.
Effectively doing their job. They had mentioned that it was not ideal for them to be seen as anything other than an ally to this community. And that was made very obvious in the treatment and effectiveness of removing me safely from that situation.
Why?
Yeah, and don't go there. Like, I'm never going to San Francisco. I mean, there's an ashram there. Of course, I'm not doing Heartfulness anymore. We're doing our own thing here, Gratefullness. But I just won't go there. Like, there's cities I will not go. There's, under any circumstances, I wouldn't go to those cities. It's getting to be like Escape from New York in these places, right? I wouldn't go to these cities in Oregon. I wouldn't go to New York City. Wouldn't go to D.C. I mean, there's places I just wouldn't go. And if you did have to go for some, reason beyond your control, you'd have to set things up in a way. I mean, this, she's saying controversial things to, obviously San Francisco. She's a young woman athlete who is talking about competing against biological men, and San Francisco's not having that. And like you said, the police department's backing the criminals, right? The people who are acting out, and they know it, so they can do whatever they want, right? So you got to find, this is why, I mean, I live in red states, right? And I'll live in a red state. And if I have to drive through a blue state, it's, avoid the city areas as much as possible. And, as this election goes through, if Trump wins again and whatever happens, things are going to break down more and more. And so this is, just a small indication of what's happening in the future.
Why were you threatened and barricaded into a room and held for ransom for hours on end? I mean, what was it you were saying that was so terrible?
I was invited to speak on my experience of my senior year in competing against a male. Nothing opinionated about what I shared. It was sheerly the exact lived experience of what me and my teammates and fellow competitors dealt with. And so I spoke. After my speech, there was, of course, a lot of protesters in the room, which I'm totally fine with people protesting. It's their right to protest. But what I'm not fine with is when it does turn violent in the way that it did. Because protesters afterwards, they rushed into the room. They turned off the lights. They rushed to the front. myself and others were assaulted, and that's ultimately when I was held for hostage for 3.5 hours.
It's just unbelievable, unbelievable.
It's not unbelievable. You shouldn't say that. You should know that this is completely believable. You didn't see all the things that have happened during the election year and the whole defund the police thing, all these things. You didn't see any of that. You weren't aware of any of that stuff going on. People being pulled out of cars, and we saw the videos, right? And there are places like, remember Chaz, or Chad or whatever it was called. It was a place in Seattle and a place in Portland. I think it was in Portland, where they got rid of the police and they created their own sovereign area, and the mayors let them do that, right? And they had this area where the protesters were the rule of law. People got murdered and multiple. I mean, it was just chaos there, and the mayors and the government allowed that to happen in these liberal places, right? And there was no rule of law. There was no. And again, I'm not a big fan of the police or the military or these things. I have been very clear of my position on these things, but I know what happens when they're not there. I know what's available out there. I know what kind of people there are out there. I worked in the sort of the criminal justice system as a counselor. I know what kind of abuse is out there. I know what kind of deviant behaviors are out there. And I know that there are people out there that if there is no police force, even if it's just 10% of the people, that's more than enough to create chaos. We've seen The Purge, right? Like, what happens in the Purge movies. That's not unrealistic. I mean, they, make it more sensationalistic with the masks and the weirdness, but, they make it more creepy than it actually is. They Hollywood it up, but if you took away the police, I know what would happen, especially in these cities, right? And you'll see it. Like, we know what happens historically when there is, like, if you take down a government. We know what happens when you do regime change in countries. We know what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan and what happened in Libya and these countries where America went in and did regime change and took down a government. We saw what happens when the system, as corrupt as a government might be and as bad as leaders are, they're better than chaos. And, when you create chaos and there's no discipline, there's no authority, and the authority can be as, horrible and corrupt. It can be the worst government. Chaos is worse. It just is. If there's no order at all, right? This is, if you ever read that book, The Lord of the Flies, right?
Thank you for your courage in the midst of that. Let's talk a little bit about the message that you were sharing, and you started to talk about it in your opening statement. Just tell us about your experience, because nobody can question your experience. I don't think anybody sitting at the table, and certainly nobody at this podium, has had the experience that you have had. You were talking about just the incredible surprise, shall I say, to put it gently, of finding a biological...
Yeah, I don't know why this is freezing. It's just this YouTube video, and it's not really important.
man, a 6'4" biological man in your locker room, and having to accept that without being asked about it, without being told about it even. What was that like for you? Tell us about that.
Again, we only became aware we would be undressing next to a man was when we had to see a man undressing while we were simultaneously undressing. And so I immediately left the locker room, and I went up to one of the officials on the pool deck, and I said, what are the guidelines to allow a man into our locker room? I know the guidelines for the competition, but what are the guidelines for the locker room? And he so nonchalantly said back, oh, we actually got around this by making locker rooms unisex. And so I'm thinking to myself in these brief moments, first and foremost, you just admitted this is a male by acknowledging how you had to change your rules to make the locker rooms unisex. You acknowledge that we do not share the same sex, first and foremost. Secondly, unisex? Any man could have walked into our locker room, any coach, any official, any man who wanted to would have had full reins to, and bare minimum, we weren't forewarned about it. And that's the traumatizing part. Of course, the experience in and of the locker room itself is traumatizing, but I think for me, it was so easy for them to dismiss our rights to privacy. Senator Durbin, in your opening statement, you had mentioned this rhetoric. It's, you had mentioned that, what message does it send to trans individuals? And my combat to that is, what message does this send to women, to young girls who are denied of these opportunities? so easily their rights to privacy and safety thrown out of the window to protect a small population, protect one group as long as they're happy. What about us? That is the overall general consensus of how we all felt in that locker room.
Kaboom. I talked about this a long time ago. This is the just let it happen thing starting to emerge. And one of the things I said, there's a lot of, in women's sports, there's a lot of, L people, right? In the LBGTQ, there's a lot of lesbians that participate in sports. You'll see it in WNBA and, soccer and things, Megan Rapinoe and, her wife, whatever her name is, the WNBA basketball player. There's just a lot of that, right? And a lot of these women, may or may not have the most positive feelings about men, some of them abuse survivors, and they're now competing against biological men. And they say they don't have a problem with it now, but, they got to have some kind of problem with it. There are a lot of liberal women feminists who are seeing biological men win Women of the Year. Like I said, it'd be a great thing if you could elect someone like Caitlyn Jenner as president, just for the feminists, the feminist movement. Like Hillary Clinton, how would she feel about a biological male being the first woman president, right? So this was the just let it happen thing that I said. Because, there's these groups that are tied together here, but they're not mutually beneficial, right? They have their own specific, their own things that they're looking to achieve for their group. And certainly the feminist movement and, lesbian women are at odds with the trans community, just because it's biological men who are taking a piece of their pie, right? That are now considered women, and are when a trans woman achieves something, it's this idea that women have achieved it. And I know the feminists and the lesbian community really can't be all that happy about that, at least in private. And so that's why I was saying just let it happen. Like you withdrew your objections, and again, this woman's obviously probably a Republican. But, it's going to affect these liberal communities more than anyone else. And eventually, there'll be a breakdown. There'll be conflict because they're naturally at odds, right? There are two groups competing for the same resources, right?
Why do you think it is that the NCAA and so many people in power seem intent on just erasing your opinion, your views, the whole category of women? I noticed that recently you just posted this to social media about a message that Harvard was sending around, I think, to its swimmers, telling them, don't talk about Leah Thomas, don't share your opinions. If you get contacted by a member of the media, then refer that to the university. Don't say anything, for heaven's sake. Tell us about this. This has been your experience over and over and over. You're told as a woman to shut up, don't say anything. What's that like?
That is continually happening. And if we do speak up, you're immediately labeled as some name. They will call you everything under the sun, whether it's transphobic, homophobic, racist, white supremacist, domestic terrorist. They will throw them all at you in hopes to deter you, in hopes to silence you. Leah Thomas's teammates, they were forced every single week to go to mandatory LGBTQ education meetings to learn about how just by being cisgender, they were oppressing Leah Thomas. They were told that they're not allowed to take a stance because their school has already taken their stance for them. They were told that you will never get a job, you will never get into grad school, you will lose your friends, you will lose your scholarship and playing time if you speak out. They told these girls that if you do speak out, and any harm whatsoever comes towards Thomas's way, whether that's through social media, whether that's physical, mental, emotional harm, then you are solely responsible, and you could be responsible for a potential death. And you don't want that, do you? Of course not. Who would ever want to be responsible in a potential...
So, this is in contrast to the Me Too movement, right? Which was supposed to be about women empowerment, things like this. For women, the feminist women, they're just allowing this movement to roll over them, right? Even Dave Chappelle made reference to this about the trans movement jumping over his, rights for African American people. Like they were getting, just a lot of love and a lot of support universally, and it's, more than these other groups have gotten. Like there must be jealousy in these other groups, the feminist movement, the other letters in the, the various other letters in the spectrum, the LGBTQ spectrum. And the trans are getting just more love than the other groups. And this is all the stuff I was saying about just let it happen, right? Because this is, the more that this happens, the more people are going to be upset about it. Like the worst thing you can do for a group is give them privileges where the other groups get jealous, right? I told this story where there was a guy who, was my coworker. I had two people in my life when I lived in New Mexico that did the same job. I had a roommate, and he had a degree in counseling, and this other guy was a big former, college football player, Division II linebacker, who did the same job before he worked with me. And what they would do is they would take these kids out into the wilderness. This is the western part of the country, in the the Denver and New Mexico and these areas. And they would camp out in these arroyos, which, when it rains, it floods these places. They're like natural creek beds, but most of the time they're dry. This is in the mountains. And, if there's flooding or rain, they'd move or whatever. But they'd camp out for months, and they take troubled kids out to the wilderness. And, it was very effective. Like, the kids would get out in nature, and they would start opening up and get rid of some of their defenses. Like after a couple months, the kids would just get better. The programs are a little bit controversial, but they can be effective. And this one guy, this college football player, he was about to take some kids out, and there were one guy quit. Like one guy didn't show up, and the other guy went out with him for one day and said, "This is too hard," and quit and just left and walked back to his car. And he was left alone with 15 kids. And one of the things he had to make sure is that the kids didn't end up like becoming friends, because they're very hostile to each other. They're very defensive. They're sniping at each other. I mean, I worked in treatment centers, and I experienced this. These level of kids, they just don't get along. They're competitive. They're jealous. But if they became friends, they'd start to, come up with some collusion and maybe rebel or whatever, right? And you couldn't have that. So there were these two kids, and they're starting to hang out and become friends. So he gave one of them a chocolate bar and not the other one. And, of course, the kid didn't share it because he was selfish. And his friend, they turned on each other, right? And so, like, when you give resources to one group and not another, the one group is targeted. This is, ultimately what's happened. And you're going to see this, that, things can turn swiftly. This agenda is being pushed out there. The majority of Americans aren't into it. When this first was rolled out in 2015-16, 60% of Americans were against it, 23% were undecided, and only 18% were for it. And it's a minority group of people, and majority of people don't believe in it. It seems crazy to all of us who grew up in an older generation. Most people are afraid to speak up, and you're censored if you do. But this is ultimately there'll be backlash, right? And they're almost pushing this out there to anger people. It seems like a setup, whatever. And the group that's going to get hurt is the T group, the trans people. Like they're being set up as some, when things turn, and eventually they always do, especially when things are breaking down, they'll be targeted instead of the powers that be that, force this agenda on everybody. But anyways, let's go to Don Lemon here. I just want to add one more thing. I haven't seen this person before. I don't know if I have. I don't think so. I've seen some of these videos a couple years ago where some of these girls were complaining about this. But she sounds completely reasonable. And 5 years ago or 7 years ago, 10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago, this wouldn't even happen, right? The power structure is so reversed itself, right? It's gotten so not what it was. Like everything's changed so much. It's inverted. Because this would never even have been considered, right? It would have been a no-brainer. Like it would have been something that, wouldn't even have happened. So, like, no one would have allowed these conditions, the governments, the corporations, nobody would have been behind this. Everyone would have been in agreement that biological males couldn't compete with biological females, that biological males, biological females would be in danger and hurt, that biological males wouldn't be allowed in the bathrooms and the locker rooms. I mean, up until 2015, this never would have even been mentioned as a possibility. No one would ever thought this possible. No one ever thought this, like no one even say this out loud. Like we should let men in with women in bathrooms, and we should let men, biological men compete with biological women on an athletic level and in schools and things like this. This never would have been considered, right? This whole agenda would have never even been, floated out there as an idea. And now it's been accepted, and it's the rule of the day, right? Like how quickly everything's changed. This girl sounds completely reasonable, but she's being targeted and, name called and, pathologized and all these things. I mean, think about how things have turned so much, right? I mean, there's big changes afoot. All right, let's go to Don Lemons here. All right, so this guy just asked Don Lemon. This is a local news station, so this isn't even a mainstream media. I don't know if anybody's interested in what Don Lemon has to say. He went to a local TV station in Memphis, right? To do this interview. This guy asked him, the reason you say that you got fired is because of truth and responsibility, right? It's kind of broken up. It's, it's a local news report, not done well. But here's what Don Lemons had to say.
I have a responsibility not only as a journalist, but as an American to tell the truth and to abide by the promises of the Constitution. Because the Constitution says a more perfect union, not a perfect union. I'm not a perfect person. No one is. But
okay, so this is about the Constitution?
I think the Constitution deserves us in order to fulfill the promise of the Constitution, we have to stand up for what is right. We have to stand up for the truth.
News to us here at CNN.
So, what? You got fired because you want to back the Constitution? I thought it was because you were annoying and you had horrible ratings and you were overpaid and your coworkers didn't like you and you made multiple gaffes and mistakes and your job performance was horrible, right? And you had this weighty contract and you were just a ratings killer. I mean, that's what it seemed like. It didn't seem like because you wanted to protect the Constitution, they fired you.
I don't believe in platforming liars and bigots and, insurrectionists and election deniers and putting them on the same footing as people who are telling the truth, people who are fighting for what's right, people who are abiding by the Constitution. I think that would be a dereliction of journalistic duty to do those sorts of things.
So he's saying he didn't want to put the right-wing people on that CNN doesn't ever put on and never covers. He'd want to put these people on that were not with their liberal media agenda and the official story, and so they fired him because of that. Come on, Don. I've watched CNN quite a bit over the years, not the whole show, but just little bits and pieces of it. And CNN has had a whole segment, this guy, this guy, Donnie O'Sullivan, and whatever his last name is, who is just going after truthers all the time. A lot of their platform was based in them going after so-called conspiracy theorists and these types of people. They weren't promoting Republicans, right? They weren't doing any of these things. So him saying that that's the reason he got fired, I mean, again, you're talking about being honest here, right? You got fired because, address the fact your ratings suck and people don't like you. And you've long passed your period where you were embraced and had an audience. That's why you got demoted from your nighttime show. He was getting killed in the ratings everywhere he went. And he pissed off his coworkers. Nobody liked the guy.
That is what has gotten me to this point, and that is what is going to carry me forward.
Being true to himself is what Lemon says allows him to sleep at night.
To know that I am doing the right thing, that I am standing up and abiding by the Constitution.
He's abiding by the Constitution. He couldn't even quote it, right? You had trouble even quoting it earlier in this interview. How are you going to abide by something you don't even know what it is? Have you ever actually read it? Like, and if you were going to abide by it, it would be freedom of speech, that everybody has the right to express themselves. And as a journalist, you would get all opinions, and you wouldn't exclude opinions. I mean, he said it was his job to exclude people's opinions that differed from what he called truth tellers that go on CNN. And nobody watches CNN because those aren't truth tellers. CNN is, a horrible network. It has bad content, and people don't buy it anymore. They don't buy the official story. I'm not going to allow other people to express themselves other than the people that are on my network who are the truth tellers. And yeah, I agree with the Constitution. What's the First Amendment? He's such an ass clown.
My profession demands that I do, because we are listed in the First Amendment of the Constitution, which is freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and freedom of the press.
And so those were all things you just said you didn't want other people to have.
As for what lies ahead for Lemon, well, he says he's a man of faith.
I'm not going to force anything. I'm not going to let other people's timeline influence me. I know people say, I miss you on television. What is your next move?
Okay, so they miss you so much that you're on a local news station in Memphis, and they've done this haphazard report. Like, you're dressed up in a suit for this thing. No national media is willing to touch you. You're not being interviewed by any major national media publication, not even some good thing on online something. Not even like a Joe Rogan or something. Certainly you wouldn't have that because, whatever. You went at it with him, I think. But you're on some local Memphis news station, and it just happened to get picked up by New York Post and Huffington Post that I know about this. Otherwise, I wouldn't. And this is your big moment where you get to tell your side of the story, and you've thought about this for months. All right, what am I going to say the real reason I got fired for? Because I can't say nobody wants to see me anymore. I mean, he just said this thing here.
Line influence me. I know people say, I miss you on television.
Who, your family? I mean, how many people are actually saying that to you? I mean, the majority of people don't. The majority of people are glad that you're gone. I'm not. You were great for me. I miss the Cuomo, Don Lemon's exchanges. I mean, I've accepted it, right? I mean, but not that he was great to mock, but that's about it. And so they don't miss you at CNN. MSNBC doesn't want you. Certainly they don't want you at Fox. And so where are you going to go? Like, where is your possible landing spot? Local TV news stuff somewhere, right? Maybe somewhere local. I think he came from Louisiana or something. I don't even know. It's a very right-wing state. I don't even know where this guy could go. Like, I don't know if he'll ever have a job again.
What is your next move? I'm figuring that out.
Yeah, because I haven't had any offers.
I don't have to be in a rush. I think sometimes people rush to make decisions and they end up making the wrong decisions.
Lemon, who published...
Yeah, because you don't have any offers, right? Like, when 2 years from now, is it going to be because you're not in a rush or because you don't have any offers? You're certainly not going to be a national media figurehead again. You're not going to host your own show. Like, the best job he had was hosting a primetime news show. That's like, a premiere spot on CNN, MSNBC, or Fox, right? The primetime slot. He had I believe, the 9 p.m. slot. Cuomo's had the 8 p.m. And Cuomo's actually got good ratings compared to Lemon's, and he was a good lead into Lemon's show. But then they put, I think, droopy dog Jake Tapper's in there, and Jake Tapper's was a ratings disaster. And so Lemon's didn't get that, people be watching Chris Cuomo's and then they segue into Don Lemon's. And so his ratings tanked even more. And he just said stupid stuff all this time. He didn't, doesn't research, doesn't work hard. He's not a thoughtful, intelligent person. And so even as a CNN shill, he's one of the worst ones. So they demoted him to the morning show, which he called a promotion. And then, from there, he just tanked it, right? And the ratings suck, and his coworkers hated him, and he was just a disaster. And so going on here and pretending you have options and offers, I mean, there's some small market things you might be able to do. You might be able to do a podcast or something like that, right? And make, enough money that it's reasonable, right? Just from a following and being famous. but in reality, he doesn't have much of anything. Whatever social media following he has, and then doing something like Tucker Carlson.
Enjoying time with his fiancée, real estate agent Tim Malone, and their dogs, leaning into life.
He's got a dog.
I'm not worried at all. People are concerned about me and more worried about me than I am about myself. I'm fine. Someone is looking out for me.
He may no
God? Is it God?
longer helm the anchor desk at CNN.
You're killing it. I'm just being me and I'm being honest.
But Lemon is still a journalist, maintaining a strong commitment to his liberties and justice for the people, he says.
My adopted city.
As he sits in Memphis, Tennessee, he reflects on the city's significance and the contributions and sacrifices of Martin Luther
So he lives in New York and has a Hampton house, right?
King Jr., Ida B. Wells, and yes, Tyree Nichols in the fight for truth and justice.
If we don't honor them by standing up and doing the right thing and not allowing people to legislate us out of rights and out of existence, then how are we honoring them?
In Memphis,
Oh my God. So brutal.
I'm Rudy Williams.
Look, they got the pyramid in the background. There's the Memphis pyramid with the capstone that used to have a skull in it. Now it's owned by like that whatever that big fish store is, that big so now it's owned by the Bass Pro Shops, right? And they have, if you've ever been to one of these Bass Pro Shops, the big ones, they have giant aquariums and they sell boats and fishing equipment, things like that, other stuff too, like outdoor stuff. But before it was originally a venue for sporting and entertainment events, including many basketball tournaments, Mary J. Blige concert, Rolling Stone concert, Mike Tyson boxing event. And Memphis is, I believe, a place in Egypt. So it's interesting it was named for that. And it has the whole capstone above that. It's like the Illuminati pyramid. And when they went up there originally to go up to the capstone, there was a crystal skull. This was a crystal skull that was there in the Memphis, top of the Memphis pyramid. The skull and bones, maybe something to do with that, I don't know. But, so that all happened with Don Lemons. Okay, so I'm editing, and I just want to add a few more things to this Don Lemons thing. So he's saying that he got fired because he wanted to honor the Constitution. Like, imagine the arrogance of somebody who's such a lightweight and so superficial. He has no depth to his personality. His takes have no depth. He has no insight. Just such a remedial person. He worked his way up in CNN, and I don't think they realized what a dope he was until him and Cuomo's were sort of partnered together, and they were getting good enough ratings under Cuomo's, which is bizarre in itself, but they were still third. But then they had their glory days when Trump was president, and people were hating on Trump, and CNN had its best ratings ever, and it was still a third. They're still behind MSNBC and Fox. But it was enough, and he had a long-term deal, and so they really couldn't get out from under his contract, but the guy was a disaster, right? And, his what he just said here was he wants to honor the Constitution by excluding people's who have different opinions than the official story from CNN, and that he didn't want to let those people on his show in the morning, so they fired him because he wants to honor the truth, and we all know it has to do with ratings and his personality. Like Tucker Carlson had the best ratings, and he's got great ratings now on Twitter. He's got 26 million views per take that he has. So he has a big audience, and it wasn't because of ratings. It was because of pressure from the powers that be. It was because his, they just hired somebody new over there. I'll cover that tomorrow. That Jesse, whatever his name is, really obnoxious person, but not a truther in any stretch of the imagination. Fox was willing to get rid of Tucker Carlson because of controversy, right? There are people who get fired, like someone like Don Imus, shock jocks, right? Whoever that guy is, Howard Stern or Brian Williams for lying, right? People get fired for scandals or public outrage, or they get Me Too'd or something, but they get good ratings, right? There's people who get taken down who are performing well. And that wasn't Don Lemons. There's nothing outrageous about him. He didn't do anything really outrageous. He said some stupid stuff, insult some of his coworkers, but that was just an excuse because they knew the guy sucked, and he wouldn't take any sort of criticism. And he's not a hard worker. You can tell he's not a hard worker. Like, he's intellectually weak, and his takes, he doesn't do a lot of research, and his takes don't have any merit. The guy just said he values the First Amendment, and he wants to censor people. He said it, and he wants to deplatform people, which is CNN's policy as well. CNN wants all people who aren't a part of the official story to be deplatformed so they don't have to compete with YouTube and these other social media giants because they're getting destroyed ratings-wise and everything else. But in terms of Don Lemon's job, they have 3 networks. They're in competition mostly with MSNBC. And MSNBC's Morning Joe was doubling up and sometimes tripling up the show with Don Lemons on it, right? So that shows you how bad he sucks. They have a barometer of success. And Don Lemon's show wasn't getting as many views as the Today Show or Good Morning America, and certainly Morning Joe and these other shows. They were losing to all these various shows. And he was making nighttime, primetime money. He had a primetime contract as a morning person, as a co-host, where the ads aren't as expensive and the views aren't as, they don't get as many views. And so he was a financial liability. And him even saying that the network realizes they have to bring in other people that have different views than the official story because no one watches them now. And Don Lemons said he's unwilling to do that. It shows you everything you need to know, right? Don Lemons is a censorer. He sucks, and he's not financially viable. They're losing money on that show, right? They're paying him too much, and they're not getting the ratings. They're probably losing money on they're losing money on the whole network. I think. They had that disaster of CNN Plus. I mean, they're doing horribly as a business, right? What I do here, I have to value my time at something. Like, how much am I worth an hour? And based in, people supporting this through memberships and based in the ad revenue, and then, I really haven't been doing much in terms of the merch, but based in the income I provide and the amount of hours I put in, I'm making a lot less money now. And at some point it becomes, well, this isn't a financial viable situation, right? And this is just a small, personal thing that I have to evaluate. Okay, you're not making enough money for your time and the resources and whatever money I put into this. I have some expenses, right, computer and, other things and that I put into making this show, right? And so if it became something where I was losing money, that would be horrible and I couldn't do it, right? But even then, I have to make enough to where it can justify this as being, financially viable. And again, he wasn't fired for outrage. He was fired because he wasn't making the network as much money and he was losing drastically, dreadfully to the competition. And so for him to come out here and say it's like, oh, they fired me because I was taking a stand, right? No, they fired you because you suck, right? Like Tucker Carlson was, you can say he was maybe taking a stand or he was doing whatever he was doing, but they didn't fire him because he sucks. They fired you because you suck. And you guys got fired the same week. Now Tucker Carlson has bounced back with even better ratings. And the majority of the stories about him, and if he wanted to do an interview with any of the major networks or any of these big platforms, they would totally do it because it would get ratings. You get an interview on a local news station in Memphis, and it only got picked up because, New York Post and somebody else I looked at this morning is picking it up because, maybe it's a slow news day because no one cares about Don Lemons and you're an industry joke. Representative Darrell Issa, he's a congressman from California. Joe Biden has officially lawyered up. This is what a real scandal looks like. I couldn't find confirmation about this in the news, but this guy's in government, and he is supposed to be a serious person. And so if Joe Biden has lawyered up and has got a criminal defense attorney, well, that's something.
What's proven and what is not. Now, according to CNN, Daily Beast, and others, you accused your Republican colleague, Lauren Boebert, on the House floor of stealing or copying your impeach Biden resolution, and then called her a nasty little bitch. And I only use that word because you've confirmed it.
You confirm that? Marjorie Taylor Greene is a disaster. They're like AOC. They're really for the other side, right? They provide fodder for the other side. That's why she's constantly being covered. Like this was covered on Huffington Post, right? Any kind of drama, she brings drama, and So Lauren Boebert had this bogus attempt to impeach Joe Biden, and they're not going to do that. For one, you don't have to set it. It's just a appeasing act for the Republicans. It's a joke. And she had the original proposal, and no one's going to vote for it because she's a lightning rod. So she's claiming Boebert copied it from her and then posted her and then, tried to pass through her initiative for impeachment of Joe Biden. And she's called Lauren Boebert a little boob.
Is this the media loving a cat fight? Because you haven't exactly shied away from this.
Well, I find it unfortunate that Lauren Boebert leaked that conversation that we had to the press. But once she leaked it out, I had to confirm that that's in fact what I said.
And why did you say that, right? I mean, why did you say that? She's a fellow Republican, a right-wing conservative. And why would you say that? Why would you call her that name? Like, you have no control over your emotions and things like this, right? I understand people say those things. It's effed up that Lauren Boebert leaked the conversation, but they've had some negative exchanges before.
Here's the real issue. I've introduced articles of impeachment, and each time I do so, along with my other bills, I communicate with all of my Republican colleagues and ask for support by asking their co-sponsorship, because I co-sponsor many other Republicans' bills. In order to pass things on the House floor, we have to get 218 votes, and that means that we have to work together.
You got to work together.
I had asked her to co-sponsor my articles of impeachment against Joe Biden on the border, and she never responded and apparently refused to do so. Then when she introduced her own and forced them to the floor with a privilege resolution without even having the courage to talk to any other Republican in our conference before doing so, except Speaker McCarthy and apparently a few others, we had a tense conversation when
That's when I realized she's a little boop.
She confronted me about things I had said about it. But this is unfortunate that this becomes public on the House floor.
Okay, so, this is just embarrassing.
Yo, what's cracking? You know what it is. It's your homeboy Ice Cube. And some of you may not have realized that I'm not part of the club. And a lot of you listening to me right here, right now, you're not part of the club either. And what I realized with the club is what makes them so mad is when you don't want to be a part of their fucking club. That pisses them off. What club am I talking about? I'm talking about the club of gatekeepers that we all got to deal with. You know who they are, and they definitely know who they are.
Cool. I think they should know who they are. We don't necessarily know who they are. I mean, that's whatever. Ice Cube said that he lost like $12 million or something because he refused to get the boop. I covered this on my other channel. There was an interview he did. He said he wasn't going to get that thing, and because he didn't, he lost money and jobs and things and work because of it, right? So, there's that. That's a positive.
A lot of people would be like, what, who? Come on, man, stop playing. So ever since I put out the contract with Black America, they've been fucking with me. Here and there, this and that. But it's cool, I expect that. I've been working with, on the big three for a long time, and you know how they've been fucking with me with that. I done made it, plain, simple, and clear what they've been doing. The NBA been fucking with us. Now, a lot of people might say, like, well, but Cube, you want to work with the NBA. Really, I don't give a fuck about working with the NBA. What I want them to do, when I say work with us, is to stop working against us.
Okay, so if you don't know this, the big three is famous retired basketball players who are, out of the NBA. And they play 3-on-3 basketball. I think they have 4 or 5 players, they rotate in. And they have some sort of a tournament. There's a contract they have with, I think it's on, I don't know, might be on Turner, might be on ESPN. It's on, something. It's during the summer. And I think it's been fairly popular. 3-on-3 basketball is a lot different than full court basketball, and it's a different game, and it has some celebrity element. I watched a little bit of it, I don't know. But what he's saying here is that the NBA is working against them. And this is not competition for the NBA. This is like a tournament that happens in the summer for guys who are, usually past their prime. These are guys who were once in the NBA, out of the NBA. There's not any, competition with NBA, right?
Stop doing that bullshit behind the scenes that we know you're doing. Mainstream media, they ain't fucking with us. And that's cool. We can do it ourselves, you know what I'm saying? We still on the rise without these motherfuckers. So we don't need them, you don't need them. So what am I going to do to deal with these motherfucking gatekeepers? Well, what I'm going to do is go on a Gatekeepers podcast tour.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. Where do we sign up?
And I'm going to go talk to everybody, and get a chance to get my message out to the people. Be able to let people hear from me, And you might agree, you might not. But the important thing is, for me to go on these platforms, say what I feel about what I think. And, some people may get pissed off because I'm going to talk to everybody. I'm not playing. And it's gonna be a crazy summer. It's gonna be fun. Appreciate y'all. Always support the big three. Hopefully I'm doing stuff that you guys dig. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for people that's bored as fuck this summer with summer sports and want something cool like the big three. So here we are. Appreciate you. Much love, much respect from your homeboy Ice Cube. Remember that.
All right, so I'm now following him on Twitter. We'll see how that whole thing plays out with the gatekeepers stuff, because that could be interesting. Or not. I just had one more thing. This video is way longer than I thought it was going to be, and I still didn't get to all the tabs I have up on my other browser. But anyways, when that swimmer girl, I forget her name, whatever it was, you see, earlier in this video, and when she said that they put all kinds of pressure on her and teammates of that one, trans swimmer or whatever, and she said that they said, well, if something bad happens and the person commits suicide or whatever it is, you'll be responsible, so don't say anything. Or whatever it was, whatever she phrased that was her story. But there's a lot of this going on because with that particular population, they have very high rates of suicide. And the view is that it's from bullying and, anti trans behavior or whatever. But, obviously it just can't be that. Like it's, life expectancy of like 32 years or, I mean, it's just a very, and a very, very high rate of suicide. And you can't live your life. If people are going to commit suicide and they have that in their personality configuration, and I, of course, lived through this with my daughter and my ex, who was always threatening suicide, attempted suicide, was hospitalized for suicide. People who are suicidal, and often they'll use that as a way to manipulate people. I mean, there's people who are suicidal who will say, they're suicidal and manipulate people to behave in a certain way, right? Because if someone's fragile, you want to be more sensitive to somebody if you know that they're falling apart, right? Just in general, if somebody is at risk or somebody is going through a tough time, you don't want to pile on, right? You don't want to push them over the edge. It's just any compassionate human being will feel that way. But it's not your responsibility. Like, again, being mean for no reason or being, abusive and things. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about doing what you should do and speaking your truth when it's your truth. It's not just your truth. I don't like that saying. When it's the truth, or at least you're getting closer to the truth, or you feel like it's your duty to speak up, or whatever it is, right? I mean, I don't agree with trolling. I don't agree with harassing people, but sometimes you have to speak up for yourself, or speak up for what's right, or you're led internally, and it's just the right thing to do. And when you do something like that, and you're told not to do that because someone else is suicidal, and I'm not talking about somebody who's in the hospital or is legitimately suicidal, and you're just going to go dump on them. I mean, I'm not endorsing something like that, of course not. But I'm talking about just being able to verbalize what you need to, whatever you have to verbalize and live your life. And what many of us have learned through the tragedies of losing somebody to suicide is that you can't stop it. Like, you can do your best, but you can't, people have to at some point find a reason to live, right? You can't carry them through life. You can't prevent something that if they're gonna do it, and it's whatever their destiny, or there's some skaras. I talk about some skaras on my other channel quite a bit, spiritual impressions that are there, and there's nothing you can do about it. And you might be a contributing factor to somebody's suicide, but it's never your fault. I mean, unless you're some FBI suiciding somebody like Jeffrey Epsteining them or something like that. I'm not talking about that. But, people who are suicidal, right? People who are violent. People who are depressed are depressed. And you can, maybe help them out a little bit. Maybe you can, hurt them a little bit. But, that's their thing. Like, that's their thing to work out. That's their thing to overcome. We all have it. We all have things like that. And people can help you and hurt you, but ultimately, it's your responsibility to live your life and make your decisions. And, for them to be putting pressure on these girls, it's just not appropriate, because of somebody's, being part of a demographic that has a high rate of suicide. I mean, if her story is true, then, that's really effed up. Anyways, I got to finish this up. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.